Good afternoon, everybody. Let me know when you're good to go. Well, everyone, this morning the modelling has firmed to a level that we have now entered a precautionary and preparation phase for the possibility of a severe weather event later this week for a very large part and a very large area on the Queensland coastline. We've been receiving briefings for a little over a week regarding Tropical Cyclone Alfred. But in the last 24 hours, things have firmed, and the likelihood of that system heading towards the coast has increased to that stage, and it is important that we disseminate this information and ask a very large amount of Queenslanders to please heed the warnings in the days ahead. So the scenario. Earlier this morning, only moments ago in fact, a flood watch has been put in place for areas from the Mary River right through to the border and beyond. That is a large part of the Queensland coastline, but it shows the volatility of the system. A tropical cyclone warning isn't in place at this stage, but it is expected that that will occur certainly within the days ahead. And again, I ask Queenslanders in that area to pay particular attention to that. The timing appears to be in the middle part of this week where that system could cross the coast. What is a little less certain is where. And it is a broad area, and Matt from the Bureau will explain why. But we're asking Queenslanders, and a large number of them, to keep up to date with those warnings because there's a few complexities. In the initial stage, it's about the potential for erosion, and we've seen a bit of that. There's then the potential for some severe wind warnings, quite severe in fact, and then flooding in the back half of the week and through to next weekend. So it is a large system, and it presents a big challenge for a large part of the Queensland coastline. Given the size of that population and the fact it's at a part of the state that we often don't see these warnings, we thought that it would be important for us to move to that precautionary and preparation phase, and the messaging will continue, and we'll continue to take Queenslanders on the journey and provide every bit of information as it comes to hand. So let me start with that erosion. Some coastal areas are potentially in the firing line, and with the prospect of that severe wind warning, coupled with some pretty high tides, there is the real risk of further coastal erosion. I've been on the phone for the last 24 hours with some of the impacted mayors and our local members in places like Fraser-Gurry Island and indeed Great Keppel Island. Some of the images that we've seen is of significant erosion in places like Putney Beach in Great Keppel Island, and I know the council is well and truly watching that and in fact acting, and we thank them for the way that they have addressed that challenge. I want to focus on the Pumicestone Passage. There is a real challenge in that area, and I'm talking about for places like Golden Beach, and the prospect of that northern part of Bribie and further breakthroughs presents some risks in that area. I know Council is meeting again this afternoon to discuss that, and as that information comes to hand, I'm urging the Council to disseminate that with the local community and indeed with the local area. But I'm mindful that there's a real challenge there because of how severe the breakthrough has been in recent times, and the prospect of those winds coupled with big tides presents a real challenge in that Pumicestone Passage area, and we're asking residents to stay up to date with that information. To put into perspective what we've seen already, some of the waves off the Wide Bay have reached in the order of 14 metres in the early hours of this morning. Some of the monitoring of those systems hasn't been in place for a long time, but that's certainly amongst the the highest recorded figure on some of those gauges. So it gives you an indication of the level of swell that is there and that is present. There has been some communication, particularly with some of the campers, and I talk about places like Fraser-Gurry, where campers were advised to get off the island, and almost without exception they heeded that advice. The Acting Commissioner will discuss a little bit more about some of the threats to some of our islands and how we'll be engaging in communication with them, and I'll ask Shane to unpack that in a moment. So I mentioned about the precaution and preparation phase. So I just wanted to take through some of those areas of challenges and just explain to Queenslanders what we are doing to make sure we're up to the challenge. A big one is in the order of telecommunications. Because this potential event is in such a populated area of the state, there remains a risk of the ability to get those messages out in real time, and information is key as a system changes and moves and could potentially strengthen and threaten more defined areas. So I've engaged with some of those telecommunication providers and asked them to do everything they can to make sure that there's bandwidth capacity there to be able to get out messages as quickly as they humanly can get out. We will work with the councils as well as statewide messaging to make sure that messages are up to date, accurate, and by working with those telco providers, we can get them in real time or as close to possible real time. That'll make all the difference. Many of those telecommunications are reliant on backup generators, so we've also spoken about to those telcos about making sure that they have backup power sources if we were to lose power, for example, because we have seen in previous events how critical telecommunications is and how vulnerable some of those towers are to a lack of power. I mentioned about some of the beaches in the islands. A number of beaches have been closed today, and we're asking people to heed those warnings and keep common sense as we see those swells increase in the days ahead. Some of the generators are in the process of being deployed to some of the Bay Islands, but it is important that people who either reside there or who are currently holidaying there heed those warnings and make sure that they make a decision on when it is they choose to stay or go. And again, I've asked Shane to spend a considerable amount of time in that space, and I've asked him to communicate that to you as well. It's important that we do everything we can for, in many cases, of vulnerable communities, things like power and water and sewerage and telecommunications. It's even more important on an island, and there are a number of residents and an increasing number of residents in recent years. So we're doing all we can to make sure that we provide those services and that we encourage those residents to make a decision about what they need to do for their safety. Government services. The Queensland Fire Department is in the process of pre-deploying some assets and making sure that we have the best and brightest ready to respond. And I talk about teams like the Swift Water Rescue Team, but indeed all of those officers, whether they're Queensland Fire, whether they're SES, we will make sure that we work across those systems to have people in place if and when they are required. We've begun communication with some of the hospitals, that's both the private hospitals as well as the health and hospital network, to make sure that where there are facilities that could be in low-lying areas, that we communicate with them about a plan for their residents in the event that that was to occur. And again, that's some days away, but it's important that we do that. And it's important that we have people who need services, that they have every opportunity to be able to get them when they need them. Our energy providers are pre-deploying things like generation capacity. They're doing everything they can to look at those networks. Again, that is an important part of the process. The operations of government will of course continue, and tomorrow Cabinet is meeting in Cairns. I've chosen to dial in, and I will be dialing in from here. Shane and I will both remain here, and we will continue to lead the operations from here, but it's important that that work continues. For those residents in the north and far north who were impacted by the last event only a few weeks ago, I want them to know that work is continuing and at record pace to make sure that we recover, and we also do everything we can to build in the resilience, and work will continue in that space. That remains important, and that's why we put recovery coordinators in place, so that we don't take our mind off that or our eye off the ball. That must continue, and it will. I'm also mindful that overnight in Townsville, to show you the depths of challenges that such a large and decentralised state has, I'm mindful about the earthquake that certainly shocked the residents of Townsville, and over 4,000 lost power. They've all been restored. The dam operators have gone out and done visual checks on the dam. At this stage, it all looks fine, but the work will continue in that space. But it shows you the challenges that exist at both ends of a large and decentralised state. Finally, before I hand over to Matt from the Bureau, I just wanted to address something, and I am mindful that it's early days, but Matt is about to advise that there is a real chance of the prospect of a cyclone crossing the coast in the southern part of the state. And I know this is not a frequent occurrence, and there may be Queenslanders who can be forgiven for thinking that this is something that doesn't occur. Well, history shows that it does, and that's why we are taking that precautionary approach and asking people to do everything you can to get ready. Things like making sure that you've got tin food, do all those things, do all the nuts and bolts that Queenslanders do well. But the history shows that it can occur. So in 1990, Tropical Cyclone Nancy, a Category 1 system, it didn't cross the coast, but it came very, very close. In 1974, Tropical Cyclone Zoe, a Category 2, crossed the coast at Coolangatta. And then in 1954, what's known as the Great Gold Coast Cyclone, and it predated categories, but many of the historians will say it was a very, very strong system, big storm surges, large damage, and again, that crossed at the Gold Coast. So we're just asking people to just be prepared and heed the warnings, do what you can to get ready, and you need to know that we've done the same. And it is important that we take a precautionary tone in this. It's important that we do all we can for preparation, and we will continue to make sure that the messages come cleanly, clearly and timely throughout this journey. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Premier, and good afternoon. Tropical Cyclone Alfred is now a Category 2 system situated offshore of the central Queensland coast. It is currently around 370 kilometres to the northeast of Bundaberg and is moving south at around 10 kilometres per hour. Over the next 24 hours, it is expected to continue moving south to southeast and also continue to weaken to a Category 1 system. The tropical cyclone is causing extreme swell and wave conditions, and as the Premier mentioned, we've seen 10-metre wave heights, over 10-metre wave heights recorded off the Queensland coast. And a coastal hazard warning is current from the Fraser-Gowrie coast right down to the Gold Coast. And that is for damaging surf and abnormally high tides, causing significant erosion and inundation of low-lying areas. As Alfred continues to move south, parallel to the Queensland coast, we are seeing strong and gusty winds being observed, with the strongest gusts recorded at Double Island Point of around 85 kilometres per hour. Even though the system is so far off the coast, we're still seeing those strong and gusty winds. From Tuesday, there is an increasing risk that Alfred will turn west and track back towards the southeast Queensland or northern New South Wales coast, with the potential for it to make landfall at a category up to Category 2 system on Thursday. A tropical cyclone may be issued as early as Monday. The range of possible tracks for Tropical Cyclone Alfred as it approaches the coast encompasses the areas of Queensland from Bundaberg right down to the Gold Coast, and these communities need to stay alert for updates. The impacts of the system as it approaches the coast are likely to be concentrated on the southern side of the cyclone, and they include damaging to destructive winds, coastal inundation, heavy to intense rainfall. And these impacts are expected to begin being felt from late on Wednesday, but then extend most likely into Thursday and stretching to at least Friday. The heavy to intense rainfall is of particular concern. We may see multiple day totals up to 300 to 600 millimetres. And this has the potential to cause life-threatening flash and riverine flooding from late Wednesday, but particularly through Thursday and Friday. And then the riverine flooding will extend well beyond that, depending on exactly where the system moves. Flood watches have been issued for widespread minor to major flooding across Queensland River catchments, including the Mary, Noosa, Sunshine Coast rivers and creeks, the Pine and Caboolture rivers, the Upper and Lower Brisbane, the Logan and Albert rivers, and the Gold Coast rivers and creeks. So in summary, Tropical Cyclone Alfred is expected to turn west towards the southeast Queensland coast on Tuesday, with the possibility of up to Category 2 impacts on the Queensland coast, particularly through Thursday. At this stage, it is not possible to predict the exact coastal crossing, and people, as I said, from Bundaberg right down to the Gold Coast need to be aware that we may see significant winds, coastal inundation, intense rainfall and flooding. The Bureau will clearly, obviously, stay very closely monitor this system and update tropical cyclone and flood watches and warnings as the situation evolves. So I urge the community to stay up to date via the Bureau's webpage, the Bureau's app and also emergency services messaging. Thanks. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Matt. As we've just heard, Tropical Cyclone Alfred continues to track down the coast. The disaster management system has been preparing all week and is ready to respond as the cyclone has tracked down the coast. And as indicated by the Premier, we have seen impacts from the cyclone to date with significant erosion around the coast. All of our emergency services have been prepared all week to respond as the cyclone moves down the coast. But now we're turning our attention to later in the week. And as the Bureau has indicated, the cyclone is expected to track west towards the southeast corner of the coast between Bundaberg and the Queensland border. This morning, I've contacted all of our district disaster groups. Our state disaster coordination group has met, and we're engaging with all of our local governments. And I've asked them to specifically identify any areas of vulnerability or risk within their communities between Bundaberg and the Gold Coast, given the uncertainty of the track. I've engaged with our critical infrastructure providers, water, power, sewerage and communications, and ensure that we take advantage of the next couple of days to do our preparations and preparedness as best we can as the track starts to become more certain as to where it's going to cross. And to that point, as has been indicated, we are starting to pre-position our generators. We've engaged with our communications and will continue to engage with our communication providers around about pre-positioning and making sure their systems have redundancy to ensure that we can communicate with the public as this system firms up. The areas of low-lying areas across the coast, areas particularly in the southeast corner that have not experienced these sort of winds or waves for some considerable time, are of most concern. And we've asked our local government areas to ensure that we have clear messaging and plans for those in those low-lying areas to be able to action. And the best place for our community to remain connected to that is our local government dashboards, our disaster dashboards for the local government area. The islands down the coast, starting with Bribie Island, Moreton Island, North Stradbroke Island, South Stradbroke Island and our Bay Islands will feel the impact of the cyclone first. And it's these islands that present a risk to the disaster management system. And as a result, I've asked our local government, our district disaster teams to do specific planning around the islands. And to those communities that live on the islands, I ask you to stay in contact early with the messaging, because I ask you to think about the risk for you and make a decision as to whether or not you should leave those islands and when you should leave those islands. Because that window to leave the island will close later in the week should this system turn west and head towards the Queensland coast. Our barge and ferry services will stop operating and will make it difficult for you to leave the island. So please stay in contact with our messaging and think about when you need to leave the island. I can assure you that all levels of our disaster management network are engaged in this system. It does present a risk to the southeast Queensland coast. However, over the next few days, as the track becomes more certain, we'll be able to narrow that area of risk. Today, I've engaged with the National Emergency Management Agency. I've spoken with the Australian Defence Force Liaison Officer within the State Disaster Coordination Centre, and I've also engaged with the Commissioner of New South Wales SES so that we can harmonise our planning and make sure that regardless of where the border sits between Queensland and New South Wales, both states can be ready to respond to the community. So again, I just finish off by saying, please stay in contact with our messaging. Our local government disaster management dashboards are a fantastic point of reference for your local government area to know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Acting Commissioner, over to you guys.
Premier, a lot of these places that will be affected by this won't be built to sort of cyclone standard, I suppose, if they're south of Bundaberg. Is that a significant concern to you?
It's a good question. One thing's for certain, though, this part of the state has had its fair share of flooding challenges and has responded well. And I genuinely believe that people will heed warnings and will do the right thing. Queenslanders are pretty good at this. Sadly, we're becoming more and more practiced at it. So provided people heed the warnings, there are some challenges. In the short term, it's about erosion, then there's the potential for the winds, and then in the back half of the week, some of the potential rainfall could provide some challenges on the flooding front. It's right across the board. Just if people stay connected, I've got every faith that we can get through the event, and ultimately it's people that have to matter and people that have to come first in this, and preservation of human life is a first priority.
You talked about warnings and alerts going out. What kind of system will be in place?
I've asked the telecommunications providers to do all they can to strengthen the capacity. You all know there's been challenges in the past, and I'm determined to make sure that everything humanly possible is done to provide the capacity to get as many messages to as many people as quickly as possible. And if we do that, that strengthens the opportunity for people to be able to respond in real time. Ultimately, it's important that people do everything they can to also stay connected. So text messages is one element, but it's also important that people, for example, go to the Disaster QLD website, that they go to the BOMS website, do all you can and just stay connected. Connectivity is the most important thing in one of these events.
So if impacted, should people be expecting to receive text messages from council or the authorities?
That is one possibility, but I'm asking people to take every opportunity to stay connected across whatever platform you can. And it might be speaking to your neighbour, it might be going onto the official government website, it might be staying vigilant and keeping your phone on you and having backup batteries to charge if you were to lose power, having adequate food and water. All of those preparations is something that people can do before the event. So it's what can you do as an individual, and then our role is to make sure that the system is in place as best as it can be. And obviously telecommunications isn't something that's administered through the state, but I wanted to use the opportunity to reach out to the telcos and ask them to provide every opportunity they can to strengthen their capacity. Because if you think about the area that Matt outlined, geographically that's a large area, but there's also some pretty big populations in very small parts, in a very small area. So if you need to get a few million messages out, that presents some challenges, and we've seen the result of that in the past. And I want to do all we can to prepare to make sure that we don't have many of those glitches that mean people don't get information in a timely fashion. But text messaging is just one element. Receiving a text is just one possibility. People also have to do all they can to actively go and look for it and keep informed. And ultimately, today is Sunday. That gives people plenty of time to do your end of the bargain and then just stay connected throughout the week and into next weekend on the flooding front.
We're expected to see a big impact to services like hospitals and stuff like that.
We're certainly preparing it for it. And everything we do is about making sure that we make those preparations, that we have a focus on precautions, and part of that is making sure that there is capacity in the health system, and where there are vulnerable people or vulnerable services, that we put in place every mechanism to keep that service continuing as in the most fulsome way it can.
Are there particular areas of concern? You mentioned sort of Golden Beach, and we've seen some of the high tides there. Are there other areas, and what's going on at the moment?
Oh, look, we've seen a level of coastal inundation and erosion from a fairly large part of the state. The Golden Beach one I raise just particularly because I've seen what's happened in the Passage in recent years, and that community has spoken loudly and clearly about what it perceived as the risk, and that's something that we will need to address. But in the meantime, my message to the community is just to stay connected with those warnings, and there is no doubt that there is the potential, particularly in that northern part of Bribie, for that the area of inundation and the area of erosion to expand, and that will definitely present a challenge. That's a buffer for that part of Caloundra. So I've spoken with the Mayor, I've spoken with the local member, Kendall Morton, the Environment Minister has been speaking with the CEO of the Council about what that looks like. In the meantime, we're just asking people to stay connected, and we'll continue to give information. And Council's also doing its bit. They'll be meeting again this afternoon to work out what that messaging looks like, the risk areas and the potential for impact for those residents.
Should people be thinking about leaving islands like
I think Shane addressed that, but I'll make this observation. We will give the information to people in an honest and open and timely way, and then people need to make that decision when to leave an island. But if there will come a point where that option is removed for the individual and services, for example, won't be there. So we're just asking people to take the preparations, and whatever their decision, just be prepared for that, and we'll support them whether they choose to go or whether they choose to stay based on the information that's at hand today. But that information will continue, and we'll see what the system does overnight, and we'll be back tomorrow to share the update in the morning.
And what advice do you have for schools?
Good question. It's early days. I spoke with the Education Minister, and he's indicated to me and indicated to the Queensland Disaster Management Centre as well that the schools are actively watching this. What we did in the last event is we gave parents the information at a set time in the afternoon about whether or not that school was going to be open for them, so they can make provisions for their kids. It's not at the stage at this point. We want to give every opportunity for kids to go to school and for parents to be able to go to work. So at this stage, it's business as usual. We will actively look at that, and the moment we have any information to the contrary, we will share that, and we'll share it ahead of time so that people can make a decision.
Food and water supply that you mentioned earlier, is there anything South East Queenslanders can be doing to prepare their homes physically for cyclones?
Absolutely. Things like your gutters, things like removing loose items, that's all important. But aside from food and water, it's also things like batteries. And the other thing is to try to get a box with some of your safe things as well. That's really important. Things like passports and your cards, that's all important things. But in the meantime, just do the little things around your house, and we will provide that information. So we've all got a role to play. The individual has to do everything they can to make sure that they are in as good a position as they can if things do turn for the worse, and we're doing the same. And I think that's why it's important today that we showed Queenslanders what we're doing, so that they know that we're taking it seriously. I use that term. It's precautionary, but it's also preparatory. And if we do both of those, and if people do the same, I'm very confident that Queenslanders will be able to handle something like this. It's in three phases: coastal erosion, then the prospect of some winds, wherever that might be, if the system was to head west towards the coast, and then ultimately it's the flooding challenge. And Matt outlines some of those higher envelopes for flooding. They're the prospect of large totals, and in catchments that are already reasonably full, there's a challenge there.
Could that potentially be like 2022 style floods?
It's early days, Claire. Let's just give people the information as it comes to hand. But the catchments are full, and that's why we're just getting people to turn their attention to what that might look like for you at your home, at your work, and in your daily life.
Should the AFL be concerned about their season opener here this week?
Let's see where that heads. That's Thursday night, so let's see where that heads, and we'll give all sports the information they need. They'll make their own call. That's how it should be. We'll provide the information to them, and in a timely manner. Let's just see where it goes at this stage.
You talk about people being prepared, stocking the cupboard with canned goods. Are the supermarkets capable of handling?
Well, so there's two elements. There's the non-perishables and then there's the perishables. What we saw in North and Far North Queensland when the Bruce was out was not a risk predominantly with the non-perishables. It was those essentials, fruit and veggies and meat and milk. That was the real challenge, getting that up and down the coast. There's, the supermarkets will be engaged, as they always are, about some of their pre-positioning, but ultimately they have to make sure that their networks are as ready as it can be as well. And now's the time for them to do that. And the Deputy Premier leads that, and he's begun that process already.
You talked about the possibility of the weather system crossing the coast. I mean, what are can you put a number, or what are the chances of this weather system hitting Brisbane?
That's one for you, Matt.
Premier, can I just ask you one more question before you go?
Yeah.
Just on Cairns,
Yeah.
you mentioned obviously you're down here because
Yeah.
of the latest stuff. You reschedule a meeting with
Yeah,
the community there?
thanks. No, good question. The answer is absolutely. And I've spoken to our member up there, Bree James, to indicate that I will be back. I've got to go back anyway to make sure that we see out the recovery from the previous event. But I will go back and I will connect with those communities. And I wanted the Cabinet to still meet, and it's important the ministers can dial in. Shane and I were both due to head up. We thought it was appropriate that we stayed here and lead this event. But to the people of the far north, I want them to know that we are going to continue to focus on the recovery for some of those communities that were impacted. And we also have a laser-like focus on the challenges that have been raised. And at the front of the queue is dealing with the youth crime crisis, and the Police Minister and the Youth Justice Minister, as well as the local MPs, will be meeting the group this afternoon, and I will be returning to meet the organisers as well. And my resolve to deal with the youth crime crisis has never been stronger. And I can assure you that the first wave of changes are underway. There will be more. There'll be more police. There'll be more early intervention. And after 10 years of it going in the other direction, I can assure you every step we take will be to make the world a safer place and to make the system a stronger system to keep those communities safe. And we've well and truly seen the result of 10 years of it going in the other direction. And Far North Queensland's been in the firing line of that. Matt?
Quickly, sorry, on Cairns again. There's a crime protest there today. When can that community start to feel safe under your government?
I've always consistently said, after 10 years of weakening of laws and after 10 years of the percentage of police per head of population going in the other direction, it's going to take time. But I can assure you every change will be about making things stronger. And when people in the far north speak, I listen. And I understand how tough things have been with youth crime over the last decade. And I can assure residents that I have one focus, and that is fewer victim numbers, and that will be delivered. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but every single change we make will be about strengthening the laws, about doing more intervention, about putting more police on the beat. And you'll never hear me making excuses. You'll never hear me telling people that there's not really a crime crisis. They've lived through that in the last 10 years. You bet there's a crime crisis. The change now is you've got a government who will acknowledge it and is working to turn it around. And I won't stop until we have fewer victims in this state.
So the question was around the chance of, the numbers around where the system is going to move. So the way I respond to that is just to back up a little bit, and we go back 48 hours ago, and we started to see a small percentage of the modelled outcomes pushing the system west back towards the Queensland coast. Now, as that modelling firmed up, our products and services, the Bureau products and services, then show that as part of the tropical cyclone track. So what we're looking at the moment is still a large spread in that modelling. So as I said, that spread really stretches from Bundaberg right down to the New South Wales coast for the potential movement and track of tropical cyclone Alfred. Now, within that spread, there is an ability to look at what are the sort of central point in that spread as to where the track is moving. Now that central track does bring the system over Moreton Bay, so the southeast Queensland / Moreton Bay area on Thursday. But that is a possible outcome within the spread of outcomes that, as I said, extends from Bundaberg down to northern New South Wales. So over the coming days, as what happened over the past 48 hours, we'll see those probabilities firm up, and the certainty will increase as we get closer to this event. And that's why we update those products every 6 hours, and as the system gets closer, they'll be updated every 3 hours, then possibly every hour. So that is the best information we can give at the moment, and those communities from Bundaberg right down to the border should be alert.
So those communities should be prepared to face, or should be acting as if they will get a Category 2 cyclone by Thursday. That's how they should operate.
That's how they should operate, and they should stay up to date as that modelling firms up. If you're living on the northern boundary of that area and you see that risk area start to contract, then that's great. But it may contract the other way. So again, people stay alert and updated with the information, and we will see the area, the uncertainty decrease as we get closer to the coastal crossing.
How much rain and wind could we see?
Say it again, sorry?
Sorry, how much rain and wind gusts could we see?
So a Category 2, so I said up to a Category 2 system. So you're talking sustained winds, so that's the average winds, up around 100 kilometres per hour, and gusts up to around 140 kilometres per hour. So that is a Category 2 system, and that's the higher end scenario for what we're modelling at the moment. And in terms of rainfall, that's even more variable depending on where the system moves. And again, the heaviest rainfall is likely to be concentrated around the southern edge of the system. So if it crosses the coast in a location, those areas just to the south of that location are likely to see the heaviest rain. 300 to 600 millimetres, and that occurring over multiple days is possible. And we are really closely monitoring whether those falls could be higher in localised locations and over localised catchments. Regardless, there is the possibility of minor to major flooding over those catchments I mentioned, over a fairly widespread area to the south of the tropical cyclone as it moves close to the coast.
Thanks, guys.